The Aussies who fought in the Second World War earned a reputation as tough warriors and loyal friends. Even in the most dire of situations, there was often space for good old-fashioned Australian larrikinism accompanied by a laugh or two. But they were men at the end of the day, and they suffered too. We've told a few Australian war stories in the past. In this video, we're going to tell a few more. Every nation still used horses in the Second World War, if not for combat, then for transport purposes. According to an article on the Australian government's Anzac portal, just one Australian cavalry unit saw action in the war. Early in June 1941, the 6th Australian Division Cavalry Regiment entered Vichy-controlled Syria. At the time, the regiment was armoured, operating light tanks, armoured infantry carriers and motorised transports. Fighting in the Syria-Lebanon campaign, the regiment lost a lot of tanks to breakdowns and enemy action. As such, the regiment's C Squadron gave what tanks it had to B Squadron. A short while before, the Aussie 233 Infantry Battalion had bayonet-charged 200 French cavalrymen at Raqqa el-Foka, killing 50 French soldiers and seizing 32 battle-ready Arab stallions. These horses were given to C Squadron, which took the nickname the Kelly Gang. Originally, there were just 18 men in the Kelly Gang, but it grew to a strength of 40 as more volunteers and horses joined up. Led by an Aussie dairy farmer named John Burt, they undertook recon missions, using their horses to quickly traverse rugged terrain and escorted friendly artillery units, coming under enemy fire a number of times. The horses didn't flinch. Although it was only in operation for 3 weeks, the Kelly Gang played a significant role in the Allied capture of Syria. Every country has their proverbial Rambo, but what about Australia? That would probably be Tom Diver Derrick, a South Australian-born warrior of the 248 Infantry Battalion. In the Second Battle of El Alamein, toward the end of 1942, Derrick climbed onto a friendly gun carrier en route to the Germans. With his Tommy gun, he stood on the gun carrier and blasted the Germans as he passed, taking out 3 German machine gun posts. According to one private, Joe Ratter, it was like a chap riding a horse into a hail of fire. You could hear the bullets splattering off the metal sides of the carrier. I thought, God, he'll never come out of that. Derrick also served in New Guinea and fought the Japanese 20th Division in the November 1943 Battle of Sattleburg on the Huon Peninsula. Here, his bravery scored him a Victoria Cross. The Japanese occupied a cliff at the top of a grass-covered slope, repelling wave after wave of Australian assaults. When the order to withdraw came from his commanding officer, Derrick told his company commander this: "Bugger the CO, just give me 20 more minutes and we'll have this place. Tell him I'm pinned down and can't get out." Derrick then assaulted the cliff under heavy fire, lobbing grenades like he was shooting hoops. He clambered up the cliff and continued his assault, following up with accurate shots from his rifle. The Japanese were so demoralized by Derrick's reckless advance that they fled, allowing Derrick to lead his men forward and take the cliff. All in all, he single-handedly reduced 10 enemy posts. According to the citation, undoubtedly, Sergeant Derrick's fine leadership and refusal to admit defeat in the face of a seemingly impossible situation resulted in the capture of Saddleburg. We all know the Nazis experimented on people, but did you know they got the Aussies too? According to Konrad Quetz, a historian at the Sydney Jewish Museum, and surgeon George Weitz, at least 5 Aussie POWs captured on Crete in May 1941 were subjected to medical experimentation by an SS physician named Dr. Friedrich Maitala. Maitala examined the men's blood and then injected them with the hepatitis-infected blood of German soldiers, hoping to find out more about human-to-human transmission of the disease. The experimentation didn't kill the men, however, and in this way, they were lucky. When Maitala was done with them, he sent them to a POW camp. During his stay there, one of the Australian men tried to escape and met a bullet. The remaining 4 survived the war and made it back to Australia. We probably don't need to remind you that Japanese POW camps were hell. Among the many other things guards might murder you for, keeping a diary was among them. Australian soldier Reg Mahoney didn't care though. As the Japanese moved him from camp to camp, eventually to Changi on the Japanese-occupied island of Singapore, he brought his diary with him, burying it in the ground to keep it hidden when he wasn't writing in it. Mahoney recalled an especially horrific event in 1942. The Japanese sent Mahoney and some other POWs down to Changi Beach with shovels and hoes. Some of the men thought that their captors were going to make them dig their own graves. That wasn't the case. According to Mahoney, bobbing on the gentle swell and fall of the water were cloth-covered blobs, unmistakably the bodies of men. They seemed to be everywhere, gruesome patches of human dead blotching the edge of the water as it lapped the pure sand of the beach. The bodies, of which there were around 120, were Chinese people forced to march into the sea where they were shot. Mahoney had to dig them a mass grave. One of the bodies, however, was still alive. In his diary, Mahoney describes how the Japanese ordered the Aussie POWs to hold the still living Chinese men underwater until he drowned. They had to do this with every survivor or face death themselves. I know we said Tom Derrick was the Aussie Rambo, but the truth is, there was more than one. Edward Kenner was born in Victoria and served in the 2-4 Australian Infantry Battalion in the Second World War. On the 15th of May 1945, the battalion was assaulting Wirrawee Mission, a Lutheran mission station standing atop a large hill near Wewak Airstrip, New Guinea. Kenner's platoon was tasked with taking out a Japanese machine gun position. Advancing, a second enemy position, one they hadn't seen, opened fire on one of the platoon's sections, chopping the unit to pieces. Thinking fast, Kenner stood in the open with his Bren gun and pumped bullets at the Japanese. Enemy fire whizzed past him, right under his armpits, but he didn't care. He kept his finger on the trigger until the mag was empty, then ditched the Bren gun and continued tearing it up with the rifle. With Kenner drawing Japanese fire, the platoon was able to capture their objective. In an interview, Kenner said, "I don't think the Nimps would have brought tea or dinner for me, so I had to get up and do something, and I honestly think that any soldier would have done the same thing." Did you know that in late war New Guinea, the Aussies bombed their own men? According to another article in the aforementioned Anzac portal, airmen Ken Lockyer, Jimmy Packer, and Ted Stahl made species deliveries while flying a courier mission from Australia to New Guinea. The men usually delivered American General Douglas MacArthur's orders to New Guinea, but one day they agreed they would start raining hell on the Aussie troops with tubs of Peter's ice cream, cakes, and newspapers too. The Yanks weren't happy about it, but the Aussies didn't care, and the sweaty men down on the ground weren't complaining about it. According to a letter by sapper Ken Izzard, two of the boys and myself were doing a bit of a hike in the mud and heat and cursing the world in general, and the bloody Nips in particular, for making us come up to this steaming hell. We try to cool things down by telling one another how nice a long draft of frosty beer or something cold would go. Just minutes after that, Izzard heard the roar of a friendly plane and tracked down one of the parcels the plane had dropped. In Izzard's words, looking us dead in the eye was 6 great blocks of ice cream. For a minute, we just stood and gaped. We then promptly called Smoko, and with the aid of some infantry boys, soon made a mess of the ice cream. But what do you think? Had you heard of any of these stories before today? Can you think of any other great World War II stories starring Australians? Would you like to see more videos about Aussies in the Second World War? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.